Okay. There we go. Some of this isn't going to show up. It looks like the screen is a little bit off on some of that, but we'll get there. I'm glad that you were here. Option A is you had nothing else to do today. Option B, you care about your children, grandchildren, and what kind of church they will inherit. Let's vote on that. How many vote for option A? How many for option B? Excellent, because this church that we hold dear, we're holding in sacred trust. And the manner in which we convey the values that are important to us to a next generation is critical. And so I'm going to share with you some things from a perspective that is both inside our church and our culture at large. And some of the research that's been done, some of the challenges that we are facing. Because there is some very scary stuff on the horizon. A number of years ago, I read a book by a man named Mike Regal. It's called The Death of the Church. What would it take for North America to look like Europe? Where you have, as was mentioned today, the Anglican Church is going to sell 1,000 churches. Let me rephrase that. They're going to sell 1,000 cathedrals. Do you know the difference? Okay. And the reason? There's not enough funds to keep the doors open, to pay the repairs. Just no one's interested anymore. They're archaic reminders of a bygone era. Well, is that what faith is going to be? And so as a result of that, a little historical sweep. First of all, I doubt any of you have heard of this guy. But on this day, September 15, 366, Damascus I became the leader of the church in Rome. Now you have to understand some things. In 366, churches only recently become acceptable. And there were 5 major centers of Christian influence in the early Christian world. 4 of them spoke the same common language. That was in Jerusalem, that was in Alexandria, that was in Antioch, and that would have been what is now Istanbul or Constantinople. They all spoke Greek, which is the language of the New Testament. But over in the West was a different population group that spoke a different language. And the church was centered and headquartered in the largest town, pretty much the only major town in all of Europe. Guess what city that is? Rome. Now, we sometimes get uncomfortable with some of this because, Roman church. Well, the reason the Roman church became the church that stood is because 300 years later, those others disappeared. Because the Muslims completely reshaped the landscape. As a result of that, last man standing when it comes to Christian influence is the center of Rome. Well, on this day, September 15, 366, Damascus I becomes the leader of the church in that area. And he realizes there's something going on with the young people in the church. First of all, this is the language that the Bible was written in. That's 1 John, verses 16 and 17. And how many out there can read that? Is that a problem if you can't read the Bible that's in front of you? Because very few people are speaking Greek any longer. Now again, it had only been 53 years since it was legal to proclaim the name of Christ and declare yourself a Christ follower in the Roman Empire and be able to live to tell about it. 53 years ago. That's all it was. That's the same amount of time, if my memory serves, when President Truman signed the Civil Rights Act until today. That's all it's been. 1965 to today. 53 years. Now in those 53 years, you've gone from being 100 persecuted group of people to one that's accepted, but does that mean all your problems are solved? And now there's a generation of kids who don't understand what it means to stand for faith in the midst of hard times. And so, what do you do with this thing called church? Well, Damascus realizes this, and so because They don't even read this language anymore. They speak what language in Rome? Latin, not Greek. So here's a young generation who sees things differently. So he asks this man, Jerome, to do a noble and necessary task. Translate the Bible into the language the people of today understand. Now, when Stan Hudson mentioned in the Sabbath sermon, this was done in Alexandria, Egypt, 2 years before Christ. Because those Hebrew kids don't speak Hebrew. So if you don't speak the language of the scriptures you're trying to understand, are you able to convey truth and values? So they translate it into the language of the day. We're still endeavoring to do that. Make scripture understandable to the people who live in that day. And so Jerome spends his life learning Greek and Hebrew to translate the Bible into Latin. It was his crowning achievement. 5 years after he finished, Rome was sacked for the first time. And 50 years later, the empire ceases to exist. And all you have left is a doctrine. Now, how many of you could read that? Even if you don't understand Latin, could you read that? Yeah, they use the same alphabet. And we could get through this and start figuring things out. It was designed for a simple reason: to make faith relevant to the next generation. And we are still in the business of translating faith in a way that's relevant to the next generation. Do you agree with me or disagree with me? And it's not just a language barrier. There's some philosophical barriers we have to deal with as well. When I would go to be pastor at a new church, I'd always want to try to find out what their history is. I'm a newbie. They have heritage. You don't want to step on landmines unnecessarily. Does that make sense? One church that I had gone to, they built this huge facility dreaming of the day it would someday be full. Now, is that a noble aspiration? Would you like to have your church full Sabbath after Sabbath?
Yes.
Well, that was their dream. One day we hope that. Now, forward-looking is better than backward-looking, because I pastored some churches, when I began asking about their heritage and history, all they can tell me is about the glory days when. It was this nostalgic remembrance of there used to be. There was a time. It sounds like the Anglicans today. All those churches they're about to sell, was there a day when people were attending and church was significant? But if you look around America today, is church becoming more or less significant? And our children and grandchildren are growing up in that world, not the one we grew up in. They don't live in a world where church mattered. In fact, more and more people, when you use common biblical references, they have no idea what you're talking about. David and Goliath. You used to be able to, you could say that in just any sort of society, whether you're a believer or not, you get the reference. That's becoming lost in America today. That's our kids and our grandkids. Scripture is having less and less influence on society in every capacity. And so with this, we think about what it was like in the 50s or in the 80s. You know what the problem is? Our children use that as dress-up days for their spirit weeks in school. It is so far removed from where we're at. So, what does that do with young adults? My opinion, everything. Because we either expect them to join our world, we have to learn to embrace theirs. Now, here's a question I want you to think about. And how you answer this question will go a long way on your view of what we do in the next generation. Which do you value more? Your traditions? Anybody can sing the song? Day and night. Okay. Tradition! Now, are traditions valuable? Are traditions truth? Or your children? Which do you value more? on, friends. We took a handful. Which do you value more? In the churches that answer, we value our traditions more than our children, guess what happens to their children? They are gone. Because we're going to hold to what we hold dear. This is the only acceptable way to do this. This is the only time to do it. Whatever you want to do, fill in the blanks on that. This is our tradition. This is how it's always been. Let me let you in a little secret. It's never been how it's always been. There was a day and age, amplification was not part of church life. There was a day and age, both the organ and the piano were not acceptable in church. There was a day and age when hymns were not acceptable in church. Did you know that? Everything we hold dear at one point in time was new, and somebody was opposed to it. Because it was radical, it was extreme. This is our tradition. We don't do it that way. Until we've done it for 100 years, and now we can't do it the other way. And we expect our children to embrace our traditions. And we're losing our kids hand over fist. And here's the challenge. Research indicates this is the first generation that's not likely to come back. Now, all throughout Christian history, people have sown their wild oats. They've gone and done stupid things. And are we glad that there's a God of grace who extends forgiveness to the stupid we have all done? Is there anybody here who is not needing God's grace to cover the stupid that you have done? Please stand. But you realize that that's a terrible path. It takes me nowhere. It leads to places I don't want to go. And I begin to realize, like that prodigal, you know, when I feed the pigs better than what I have, maybe it's time for an awareness check. Things weren't so bad. And there was a return. But the indications are, from all the research being done, that's not likely to happen in the future. For some very significant reasons that are changing and morphing as we speak with this younger generation. There was a day, so you're wild oats, you get married, you have some kids. I was like, wait a minute, that kid needs some religious instruction. Where's the best place to go? Take it back to church. And this is very personal to me. Much of my ministry is involved youth and young adults. And I can tell you all kinds of stories, but they didn't come here. I mean, I started multi-church Pathfinder clubs in Minneapolis and Seattle because these kids need something that's not happening. Working with youth, young adults, most of my ministry because these kids need something that's not happening. If the church is not relevant to the next generation, who's to blame for that? I take that very personally. And since I have 3 children that are all in their 20s, boy, I want there to be a church where they are embraced and welcomed. I'm glad there's some amens, because I imagine I got a few others out here that either have children or grandchildren in their 20s, and don't you want church to be a place for them? It's personal to me. I taught for 10 years. I took kids around the world on mission projects so they can see firsthand the difference they can make in the lives of others. You will never forget. Whether you walk away from faith at some point in time, someone mentions one of these places, you will not forget the miracles that God did, because we talked about them all the time. And I could go on and on about the things that happened. God opened doors that were amazing. There is a good God, and the kids need to see the evidence of it. So these matter to me. It's deeply personal. And I want the church to be a place where my kids belong. Much would influence, the reality is we're losing our kids. Now, I don't know what it's like here in Wenatchee. Maybe you've got it figured out. Maybe you have all the answers, and you're not losing your kids. Or maybe this is a reality here too as well. Are you concerned about your children and grandchildren? Yes or no? Yes. Then from this point forward, we're all on the same page. There was a book that I read that impacted my thinking. A massive research study done by the Barna Institute called You Lost Me: Why Young Christians Are Leaving the Church. This was a follow-up to something that was research on why the secular generation, but he found all these Christians who'd walked away. Why are these young adults walking away from church? And so he did more research to find out. And this generation is unique for a number of reasons. The notes provided for you. One of the things that they have that I did not have growing up, access. What do I have in my hand here? This is a portal to the world. How much time does it take me to find information on everything? I now realize that when I speak publicly, I'm being fact-checked in real time. So if I have that great sermon illustration, either I tell them it's mythology, or I better know that it's true. Because all of a sudden, if you portray as true something that's not, what have you done to credibility? Well, is access good or bad? Some of the downside to access, somebody with a wacky-do idea now can find like-minded wacky-do thinkers globally. Okay? So if you believe that Elvis Presley is alive, will you find an Elvis Presley alive support group? And the most intriguing phenomenon that's filtering across society that people are buying into, have you heard of the Flat Earth Society people? Give me a break. They're everywhere. But now you can find like-minded wacky thinkers all over the globe. With all kinds of, it's bizarre. Technology has opened up the world in all kinds of ways. And the sad part is, you now view life not with human interaction. Swipe on the screen. This is illustrated to me several years ago. There was a young man I was taking home. It was after basketball practice, and my son was there, and Jordan lived nearby, so I take him home. And he hops in the car, and it's like, oh, I don't know what the assignment is for a classroom tomorrow. He pulls out his phone. And he texts somebody. I'm watching this. And we wait. And we wait. And he gets a message back. But the message back wasn't precise. So he texts back. And we wait. And we wait. And we finally got an answer, and then we leave. And we're driving to his house, and I turned to Jordan and I said, Jordan, you have a phone in your hand, right? Why don't you just call? I mean, you'd have had the answer in 2 seconds. And if it wasn't clear, it'd have taken 3. His answer shocked me. I don't like talking to people on the phone. So this access is creating avenues in some regards, but not human interaction avenues. Now, is that story isolated? Have you ever sat and watched a young adult interacting via screen rather than via reality? And as a result of this, I mean, they're connected. You can find restaurants and weather and pay your bills, watch a movie shop, and never leave the device. How does Amazon make its business plan work? Because this is the portal to reality. Okay? I have access to everything, but not human interaction. Now, as a result of that, since there is full access, that means that everything I find on there all has equal value. If I were to type in, name a subject. Thank you, Donald Trump. Okay? If I typed in Donald Trump on Google, what would I find?
Garbage.
75 million different things, okay? Are all of those 75 million article stories all of the same value?
No.
You think I'm crazy? Type in the Adventist Church. Type in Ellen White. Type in, you get everything. So here's a generation. Oh, wait a minute. Does every view have equal value?
No.
Come on now. Do the Buddhists, Baha'is, and Baptists all believe the same thing?
No.
So all of their ideas all have equal merit? Yes? Welcome to the generation we're trying to pass value on. Or make equal value. So the Buddhists believe this, it's good for them. The Baptists believe this, it's good for them. The Baha'i believe that, and we should not get into that debate. That's the access. But what it's leading to is alienation. While the device is my portal, I'm becoming disconnected from family, community, institutions. It is I will have hundreds of Facebook friends, but no real connections. And that is a challenge in our world. Rootlessness. Used to be by the time you're 30, these were the things that you'd have expected that had happened in life. And this was how you've left home. And most of us who are a little older, we know when that date is. For me, it's when I went away to school at age 16. I left home. 1,300 miles away. Yes, I still get mail there, but for all practical purposes, I have become an independent entity. Age 16. Am I alone in that? Okay? You've left home. You have finished schooling, whatever that is. You've terminated that. You have financial independence. You're able to care for your own needs, whatever they are. You have gotten married, and you probably have a child. That was what it meant to be settled by 30. In 1960, that was 77% of all women in America and 65% of all men. 1960. Today, that's 46% of women and 31% of men. Single parenting is now 50% of all births. The society has changed. How many people do we know who are moving back home because they can't survive on their own because of the economic realities? Finishing school, I find out that that degree in French Renaissance literature that cost me $140,000 doesn't get me a job. And now I'm going to sue the school for taking my money and give me a degree. They didn't make me take that, okay? It's warped. Financial independence, this generation's realizing the odds of them having what we take for granted is going to be very complicated at best and maybe never happen worse. So getting married, it's not an option. I can't afford to. And this is their world. And the skepticism of those who say they have information is an alienation factor. You don't trust the talking heads either in the media or in the church. If I use the name John Stewart, do you know who I'm talking about? I guess that's good news. I also find it a little disturbing. Jon Stewart was the host of a comedy show portraying itself as journalism called The Daily Show. It's now run by a man named Trevor Noah. I'm glad you aren't watching it. But guess who is? Your children and grandchildren. And when President Obama was running in 2008, guess where the young adults of that era were getting information on politics? Not from the Walter Cronkites of the world, from John Daly, doing comedy as journalism. Okay? We don't trust media. And as they grow and continues on, there's even less of that. We're just skeptical. And so in the church, whoever that is, the pastor or some official makes a proclamation. Do they trust it? Do they believe it? No. Not at all. Which leads to the third one. They have access, they're alienated but authority. I mean, they look around and they see this disconnect between what people say and what people do. Now that's fine if it happens outside of the walls of the church. But if there's a disconnect between what people say and what people do in the church, is that a problem? There's no Billy Grahams on their radar screen. If they have a question, are they going to ask the pastor about it when it comes to spiritual matters? Where do they go to find answers on spiritual issues? Let's Google it. They're tech savvy, but not truth savvy. And all these religious voices to listen to and peers to listen to influences greatly what the authority is. And so ultimately, I've had people say this. Great, you have what works for you. Okay? That's a truth that works for you, but I've got a truth that works for me. There is no such thing as the truth. But what do we as Adventists so frequently proclaim? We have the truth. And guess what that says to this generation? Narrow-minded, bigoted, out of touch with reality. our own language is causing further alienation by passing ourselves off as authorities when they aren't buying it. Are you catching the challenge we're facing here? And so as a result of this, no universal truth. So what's wrong with that? So when young adults walk out of the church, the research kind of described them in three ways. The first one, nomads. These are individuals who are wandering. Faith is seasonal. It's not that they've abandoned faith. They'll show up on occasion, but it's just not a priority. They're not angry or hostile. They're just experimenting because there's no roots there. They're cultural Adventists. The other has no real authority in their lives. And so, I still identify. I still have a number of my former students who will identify as a Seventh-day Adventist, but not because they're practicing anything. But I just haven't done anything else. So I'm a nomad. I'm just a wanderer. There are another group, prodigals. They have left. Just like that young boy who took his father's money and said, "Hasta la vista, Dad. I am done with this." Either because they look at our church as being intellectually untenable. All these things we talk about, no way. It just doesn't make any sense to them. When they examine faith, they find nothing that they can put their minds around. Or they've been wounded by things done to them in church. Now, I know it never happened here. Have you heard the horror stories of things that are sometimes said and done? People in church. I was pastoring in Bellingham. There was a young man who drove himself to get to Sabbath school because his parents couldn't get their act together to get there on time. He's 18 years old, and so he's bought his own car, and he gets in his car and he drives to church to be at Sabbath school on time because it irked him so badly that mom and dad couldn't get there on time. Now, they weren't bad people. They just weren't timely people. And he shows up now. Is this good news or bad news?
Good.
And he walked into church one day wearing a baseball cap. Is that good news or bad news?
Yes, sir.
Well, he walked through the door of his own volition. He's 18 years old. Are we glad he walked through the door? I certainly hope so. Except one of the founding saints, Weir, was just in a titter. Because somebody needs to tell that kid. And I can share this story because Lloyd is no longer with us. He was 86 when I was there 20 years ago. No, 25 years. It's a long time ago. And Lloyd is going to read in the riot act, and I got wind of this. Because this kid needs to understand proper decorum. He needs to understand how you should conduct yourself. Have you ever heard those stories? Fortunately, I was able to catch Lloyd before he caught the show. And I shared the same. He drove himself to be here on time. He's heading up to Sabbath school because there is something happening in there that has meaning and relevance in his life. Why is that such a big deal? And with all the modern this generation just got stuck. He stopped off. But if Lloyd had gotten there first, might the story turned out different? Have you heard those stories? See, the prodigals leave because either this makes no sense, and I don't know where to turn around, or I have been wounded, and I am not coming back. There's often regrets that they carry, and they move on. Third group, called the exiles. They really want to honor God. They just don't know how to do it in a church setting. And their faith, it's there, but they have jobs that just don't fit what we think they should be doing. For instance, what do we do with a good Seventh-day Adventist young man or woman who's a barista? Now, Now, since none of you drink coffee, you didn't know what that is. That's good. But that's the job they have to get through school. They're a barista. Or they're in the arts. Or media. One young man who's a member of my church, he was into lighting at big events. And doors open for him. And he shared with me, he was invited to run the lights for a 1,500-person party in Seattle. He was the only straight person there. Yeah, that's an odd place. But that's the career path that opened to him. And he was doing lights for all kinds of massive events. Running lights, all this stuff. That's an odd sort of job. They're in fashion or finance, the science. They are strangers in a strange land. And where does my faith fit into that? Either I shelve it or they're exiles. I mean, I didn't know how to talk about this. That's the world these kids are in. It's not the world I grew up in. We understand why they're leaving. There are some things happening in churches that are very specific and very tangible. And we're going to end with what we can do about it. Because it's one thing to share, man, here's the lay of the land. Okay, how do we now navigate the lay of the land? Fair enough? Let's get the lay of the land. First of all, when young adults look at church, this is a word that shows up over and over again. Have you heard about the helicopter parent? Hovering over them all the time, making sure nothing bad ever happens. I mean, when I was a kid, you come home when you're hungry. And you come home when you're tired. And you do it again the next day. But anymore, if you step out in the front yard and mom and dad's not right there, someone's calling the police because you're an abused, abandoned child. I mean, the stories are just sad and tragic. But if the church operates that way, that you can never step out of these prescribed boundaries, these safe areas, you demonize everything. You don't go to these places, you don't watch these things, you don't talk to these people, because evil lurks there. I got news for you, friends. Evil lurks everywhere. And if we don't help our kids begin to understand, yeah, okay, how do we face it and address it? If we make everything sacred or secular, we're not addressing the complexity of our world. And these kids never launch into faith. And we are losing some of those creative people. You know that many of our best entertainers grew up in church? Yeah. But there was no place for them in church. We need discernment. Not just to hover and try to protect. Everyone else out there is not our enemy. Faith in practice is a complex reality. And being Spirit-led can be a bit risky. And the jobs that these kids may be holding may be different, but it's a place to engage in faith in ways that I cannot. And if we help them dream big, what could they do for God? To over-shelter our kids doesn't help. Oops, wrong way. Second, when kids are talk about what the church is like, this word shows up. Isn't that horrible? To think of the treasures of truth as shallow. You know, this separation, I have faith and then I have my real life. There is nothing shallow about faith. The things we hold dear as a people, it's nothing shallow about it. And to just try to soft cover a thin veneer, it's been said that some people's faith, it's a mile wide and an inch deep. It has no real bearing on what happens in my life. How do you get immersed in something that's an inch deep? Faith is not shallow, but that's what's seen in church. Nothing ever addressed, nothing that actually challenged my thinking. This shallowness is what happens in most churches, and why bother? I call this moralistic therapeutic deism. Few moral values, love Jesus and feel good, but there's no one really out there. It's like warm soda on a hot day. What do you want to do with it when you take it into your mouth? Spit it out. It has no value. And if we portray a faith that expects nothing, calls for nothing, soon we realize we have nothing. doesn't speak to the life that they're living. Because society is shallow. We need to be interacting in ways that have depth and purpose and serious call for discipleship. To live a life of significance in a hostile alien world. And the best way to do that, it's an old-fashioned term. It's called apprenticeship. Take one of these kids alongside of you and help them know how faith does have some nitty-gritty. Share with them how you have struggled to grow and become the person God's made you to be today. You weren't always there. You didn't come out of the womb perfect. In fact, you haven't arrived yet. Take them with you. Help them see your faith journey. Well, if you were there this morning, you picked up on this one. Is our church a place where scientific inquiry and endeavor can be done with excellence?
Yes.
There are two people who think that. Either the rest of us aren't sure or we don't want to weigh in on that subject yet. But to young adults who are immersed in a world of science and technology, I remember when a phone had a cord. I've had this thing 3 years. I still don't have any clue what all those things it does. Am I the only one? And so when my son says, well, Dad, just do X, it's like, right. Quick tutorial right now on what that does. It's not my world. I didn't grow up with all these things in my hand. For them, it's second nature. We are about to graduate the first kid where 9/11 means nothing. They weren't even alive. Can you believe it? This will be the year that those first kids born after 9/11 didn't graduate. It's, whoa. What's changed since then? And so this anti-science reality. There's always something out there, seems to be in the Bible. And there's always some scientific truth, right? Stanford, we found Noah's Ark on Mars. Ding, there it is. And so as a result of that, it's hard to speak into, but science is about dialogue, creative problem solving, living with questions and ambiguity, group brainstorming. These have to be valued. But sometimes church just wants the right answer, not the process. But when it comes to all the scientific things, do we have all the right answers? Not yet. And we should not be so quick to proclaim that we have all the right answers, because we might be wrong on some things. And if we don't equip our kids to deal with some of those challenges, that we want to just give the right answer and be done with it, the research in this area is scary to me, because our kids, particularly if they're going to a public school, they are being inundated from day one in a godless reality. They have to have answers. And this was firsthand. Arthur was a brilliant man. My local church helped to raise funds to get Arthur to go to Auburn Academy. Because family couldn't afford it, but he was brilliant. And we raised funds, and he was there. Well, then I transitioned from pastoring to serving as a chaplain at Auburn his senior year. And he's still a brilliant kid. And now he's getting a scholarship to go to Walla Walla. And I was excited about that, because college was not something that was part of his family DNA. But Arthur's got a lot on the ball. And he gets a degree in the sciences, and he does well. And he gets a full scholarship to go to Washington State University for a master's program. Is this good news or bad news? You're in the sciences, and you're going to go get a master's. If you don't have enough foundation and enough answers to what's about to be thrown at you, this becomes challenging. And unfortunately, he did not. And so in that master's program, now there's questions being thrown, he doesn't know where to turn for answers. Obviously, this faith stuff is just like that cute picture of Noah's Ark. It's fairy tale. And to this day, I'm still in conversation with Arthur. But he has gone on, pursued a PhD, he's teaching in New York, he's a brilliant kid. But that childhood faith doesn't fit the reality of his modern world. And I'm endeavoring, but it is not easy. We must be a place where science fits into our system. Why is it that the Christians were the ones who could put a man on the moon? Think about it. Why not Muslims? Why not Buddhists? Why is it that Christians could look at the heavens and realize that that solar pattern is going to follow consistency because we believe in a God who's the same yesterday, today, and... But see, if I don't know that the moon's going to be in that place when I launch that rocket, am I launching a rocket? If I just believe it's karma, or what? No! All of the great scientific minds were believers because they knew there was a God of order that could be trusted. And so let's understand his processes and work with them. Where are those people today? This is what the church needs to be. And we need to be speaking into these areas that our kids are wrestling with. Stem cell research, good or bad? Depends on how it's done, folks, and we're not talking about it. Cloning, good or bad? We're doing it. When will the first human be cloned? Does the research exist? I'm dating myself, but I remember when Time Magazine put out a 10-page spread when the film Jurassic Park came out a long time ago. And their answer was, this is not science fiction. This is science going to happen one day. Do you know that an extinct bull called the auroch has been reintroduced via DNA testing, cloning processes in Europe? Did you know that? This is an extinct animal for 400 years. It now exists again. And do you think that trying to bring T-Rex back to life was not in the back of somebody's mind? Okay? Hasn't happened yet. But is the science possible? I don't know, but are people trying? So, what do we say about this? Animal testing, pharmaceuticals, technology's impact on the brain. What is continual contact with this device doing to our thought patterns? We need to be speaking into this. Cosmetic and elective surgery. Friends, the things that are being done by our teenage women especially, so they can fit this glorified, unrealistic expectation, is disturbing. And if all your value is on how you appear so you can make the front cover of People magazine, there is something seriously warped in our society, and we're not speaking about it. This is science. And we can't ignore these realities. Beauty enhancements, nutrition, agriculture, weapons, military, on and on and on. We need to have interactions with scientists who are people of faith. And we need to help our young people learn how to think, not simply what to think. Every year when I began my classes, I would tell my students, my job as your instructor. Something I read in Book Education about the importance of training young men and women how to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other men's thoughts. We need this, because if we are not engaging in the world these kids live in, we have no place in this. Best word to describe it: stewardship. Utilizing their God-given resources in productive ways. Now, I may be getting to a point of no return, but I didn't write the research. I'm just sharing. The fourth area that is stated why our young adults are walking away is the repressiveness of church in one particular area. Here's the question. Sex, good or bad? What are we talking about? And if we don't talk about it, and if we tell these kids not to talk about it, are we sharing with them the beauties that God... Again, who dreamt up the idea? Who gets all the credit for all the fun stuff that you can't do? It's not so much fun. mean, what do our kids think about human sexuality? What do they think we think about human sexuality if we never talk about it? Many young adults are torn between what's a false purity of traditionalism and an empty permissiveness of their peers. Because if you go to a high school or college campus today, in fact, every year, there is a list of the 10 best party colleges in America. And how do you make the top 10 list? There's nothing repressive, that's for sure. And so you're dropped in that environment as a good church kid, and simply saying just don't doesn't cut it. Gotta have reasons. And some of that's good. See, we haven't talked about chastity and fidelity. They're good Christian traditions. But the traditions are because the realities these kids are facing, they don't know how to cope with. For instance, what I mentioned before, access. How easy is sexual access in our society today? Okay? I mean, there are apps I read about that are so disturbing because human sexuality is as common as a bottle of pop. There is nothing intrinsic that God has ordained as special. It's being portrayed. And so access, it's everywhere. Alienation, we have a generation of absent fathers and lack of connections. And so I'm looking for love in all the wrong places because I do feel isolated and worthless. And authority, where do young adults get their information on human sexuality from? Typically their peer group, who definitely have all the answers. We need to be talking about sex with our kids and our grandkids. Not the functioning part. You can figure that out fairly quickly. But the relational part. When God made Adam and Eve, there was a connection intended between people. That relationship is what is missing in modern human sexuality. It's about parts, not people. It's about performance, not heart. And our kids are being swept up into this, and they cannot make sense of it or survive it. And the scars don't quickly and easily go away. And if something goes wrong, just get rid of it and keep going. But the emotional damage as a result, I'm proud of some churches. For a long, long time, we've talked about unwed pregnancy. What are we doing about it, though? There are churches who are actually helping people during that entire pregnancy process. We're going to help you keep that child because every life matters. So therefore, it gets a little nitty-gritty and dirty, but by the same token, that's a person that matters. And if someone gets pregnant, one of our kids, what is our response to that? Typically, angry for sure. But how do we treat them when they walk through the door? Jane's 8 months pregnant and very obvious. She's 17 years old. What's our response? And how you answer that question determines how long Jane will keep walking through that door. Now, should we deal with the mistake? Yes. Is banishing Jane the answer? No. Because how you answer that question determines how many times Jane walks through that door. See, that's where faith becomes relevant. We all make mistakes. That was just a whole lot more obvious. And how do we help with this? And so, man, to minister to people where they're at in that reality. Sex isn't taboo. It's about relationships. It's about selflessness. It's not me getting what I want. It's about me serving someone else. It's about care for the other more than myself, and that's how God designed it. And if we don't say that in this world, we are repressive. We're not telling the truth about what God designed and called, what did he call it? Very good. And I don't know what Adam said when he woke up and saw Eve. I don't know. But I don't think repressive was the word that came to mind. And so, sex is everybody's business. It should be the church's business. It's God's business. And why is it something we can be talking about? What are the laws of the land when it comes to marriage today? Anything goes. And how far down that road we're going to go, I don't know. But if you make marriage, however I define it, why not polygamy? Why not? The Mormons may revisit that. Because marriage ceases to be what God said. What about some of the other, all these gender issues that are out there? Are we speaking into this world? We have kids that are confused, no doubt about it. The transgender stupidity that's going on, and I say that publicly and I have no problem with that. Right. These are confused kids, and to give them drugs to help their confusion when they're 14 years old, that is criminal. Right. Now, once they're an adult, okay, but as a kid, that's the law of the land. We are not speaking into the world of aberrant sexuality. We just want to pretend it's not there and go away. Gender issues and birth control, reproduction, we have got to be way more relational than we've been. Another reason young adults say they have no interest in church? Exclusivity. Have you ever heard the phrase, non-Adventist? Now, I don't know why you chuckle, but this younger generation, when they hear that phrase, it doesn't resonate in a positive way. Because we are saying there's something about them that's different than us, and that exclusivity doesn't resonate. See, this generation is about inclusion and agreement. And as a result, loyalty to institutions is faltering, but loyalty to their peer group is heightened. And being fair and reasonable is more important than being right. And so if we are perceived as being unfair and unreasonable, I don't care what the subject is, we've automatically lost the conversation because of perception. Now, my generation, we love a good fight. Man, we can argue all kinds of things and just go at it and put our arms around each other and keep going. But that's not this younger generation. Because they grew up watching these fights. And they are much more conciliatory in their approach to life. And any church that's not perceived as accepting people, their beliefs, their activities, their hairstyles, their tattoos, I mean, why join them? I have no reason to be part of that. And if you just rail against sin and sinners all the time instead of helping people affected by sin, they have no interest in what you have to say. Now, you don't have to agree with me. That's the research that's out there. And if we want to portray ourselves as better than, holier than thou, we can do that. But the impact on this next generation is staggering. And so the word I want to use, be accepting, be inclusive, embrace. Whoever walks through that door, that's a huge barrier. If they walked through that door, that's a huge step. And the first thing they need to hear is not, where have you been? Why don't you go and put on some decent clothes? What's up with the hair? What's the first thing they need to hear? Man, I'm glad you're here. Oh! That's a child of God that walked through there. That's one of our kids that walked through there. That's one of our kids. And if you want to get this preacher riled, start damaging the kids. In fact, I read somewhere. This is the gospel according to this Mark. If you cause one of these little ones to miss out on my kingdom, have you heard this? It'd be a whale lot better for you. Go out on a big lake. Any big lakes? Oh, I've got the river. Close enough. And while you're out there in the boat in the river, you tie one rope into the rope around your ankle, you tie the other end on a big rock, and throw the rock over. It's going to go way better for you to do that than what I have planned for you when you mess with one of my kids. Have you read that before? This is what the research is saying about this generation. And this exclusive element, you got to embrace it. And finally, doubtless. Is it okay to have questions and still be considered faithful? I see one head nodding. That means all the rest of us have all of our faith questions firmly and clearly understood. See, I'm on this journey not because I have all the answers. I'm on this journey because the answers I found are way better here than anywhere else. I still got some questions, but because the answers I found, I have faith that there will be more answers to some of the questions I haven't gotten an answer to yet. I have no problem asking questions. In fact, I've been accused of asking too many. But if you don't ask questions, then how do you get answers? And when you ask a question, if you get blasted for the question, we don't ask those kind of questions around here. Is the church the place where tough questions can be asked? And there are some tough questions. Why is there suffering in our world? We have an answer to that. Why is there evil in our world? We have an answer to that. Why is it that we, simply because we were born here, have so many blessings where if you have to be born somewhere else, you don't? We have answers to that. And we also have a system trying to help with that. Is the Bible trustworthy? There are answers to that. You can ask these questions. Do all religions teach the same thing? Are we all going to the same place? No, they don't, and we're not. But if you can't ask those questions in this environment, that's why I love teaching. Every year, question box sometimes a year, you can ask me anything. And here in a few minutes, you can as well. I may not know the answer, but I'll give opinions freely, that's for sure. But if we can't ask, we can't let our challenges be expressed. See, one of the fundamental flaws of Adventism is we are expected to have all the answers. We've got our act together. We are the people who are perfect, waiting for Jesus to come. Wake up and look in the mirror. No, we're not perfect. Yes, waiting for Jesus to come. Are we on the path? Yes. Have we arrived? No. And to admit that there are things we wrestle with helps this next generation. Is it possible to be disillusioned by the institutional church? Now, I don't care what your perspective is on a certain vote that happened in San Antonio in 2015. I don't care. If you wonder what I'm talking about, talk to the neighbor. But the way we then treat people who view it differently says way more about us than about the vote that was taken. Because if we disagree on something, I'll be very honest right now, I'm concerned for the solution being brought forward at this time. And most young adults look at this and say, if that's what the church is becoming, I don't know if I want to be part of this. Because the proposed solution troubles me deeply. We'd find some solution, not sure that's the right one. See, when our leaders are exposed of having feet of clay, that can be very disillusioning, unless we've been dealing with it all along. Is it safe to ask? Yeah. But not just ask, be involved in church life. And it was so great to see kids involved. They can be involved in church life. So, how do you get out of this place? That's the lay of the land. It's like a path through. This is something that can happen in every church. Being aware of what these kids are dealing with. First of all, have you heard of this guy? We love Daniel. Daniel chapter 2 with the statue. Okay? Daniel chapter. But more important than some of the details of Daniel, our young adults need to understand the life of Daniel. This is a young adult, probably in his late teens when his world came unglued, when the Babylonians breached the wall, when he lost his manhood outside those walls and then marched hundreds of miles to now serve as a eunuch and for a foreign king for the rest of his life. That's Daniel. But he was intelligent, committed. Holiness defined him. In the midst of this pagan culture he lived in, he could speak to that culture. he was protected by his faith in God. Did he have deep faith? Remember that 10-day test? How easy would it be just to eat what's in front of you? I can't dishonor my God. Do our young adults understand that everything they do has consequence and significance? And are they seeing in our lives that everything we do has consequence and significance? And this faith that we profess, we actually practice with integrity, with humility, with consistency. And the science of his day, oh, it's cutting edge. The gardens that Nebuchadnezzar built, the river running through the city, the sexuality of the day, it is prominent, and it is explicit, and it is inappropriate, but it was everywhere. And he's part of this group that's going to be wiped out because can't get the answer to the king's dream. I mean, he was on the inner circle. That's this young man. And he lived a life of faith in the midst of that horrible mess. And the only thing that could be found fault with him at the end of his life was one thing. Just one. What was Daniel guilty of at the end of his life? I opened my window and prayed. That's it. If that's all that could be found guilty with us, would our young adults look at our faith a whole lot differently? Because how we practice it. So when our kids look at our church, this is what the most recent research says that our own kids are saying. Why they leave the church? Hypocrisy. Marital difficulties. The high levels of conflict you find in the church. The lack of friends inside the church. Conflicts with other church members in the church. Family conflicts. What word shows up frequently there? And to a generation that doesn't like fight, guess what they do? Walk away. Can those be addressed in every local church? How do you stop being a church that's hypocritical? Will people still make mistakes? Yes or no?
Yes.
But if you say you're doing X, do it. Marital difficulties? Be a church that finds a solution to this. One church I was reading about in Indianapolis, they passed a resolution. No more divorces in their church. Excuse me? No. No more divorces in our church. This is a blight on our homes and our society. No more divorces. You get to the point where you think that's the next step in your life, we as a church are putting in every effort, no expense spared, to solve this. Because the time has come to take what we profess seriously. So if you're wrestling with something and you have reached an impasse, the church will step in and pay whatever is necessary for this professional help, this. We're going to find a solution. Because commitment matters in a society where there is none. Wow! That's taking your belief system to a whole other level. Conflict in the church? Will there always be disagreements? Do they have to reach the point of such hostility? Okay, now maybe you got the Wenatchee church. This is the church that does everything right. But then you've got the East Wenatchee church. That's a church that does it even better. Might not step on some toes. But the church that has their act together completely, that's Gary's church, right? Hey, you know what? Different flavors. You go to Baskin Robbins, they all serve ice cream, right? How many flavors are there? 31. Someone's been there. Could there be 31 flavors of Adventist churches in this valley?
Yes.
But they're all committed to the same Jesus and the same hope of glory. We can do something about that. Because all this conflict stuff just doesn't resonate. Lack of friends. What can be done to help young adults solve that problem? Do you know them by name? Could you call every person under the age of 30 by name in your church? If you can, may your tribe increase. If you can't, you have an assignment. Because if you saw them and you could call them by name, that's going to resonate in ways you will have no idea, because they're rootless. And to have someone be able to call me, man, names matter, because it's attached to a person, get to know them. We can deal with this. So how are we going to reach and retain our young adults? What do we think what it means to be a disciple? Start with relationships. Know their name. Create a place where real family is being demonstrated. All these divides in our society, the racial, gender, etc. The church is a place where all that's left out there. We need the vitality of these young people. We need them. Rediscover what it means to be a Christian and their vocation, this call to a life of faith. We need a mentor who's going to help with this, because some of these jobs, they're a little odd. But can I serve Jesus in odd places? I hope so. Because if we say no to that, then we've just closed the door to a lot of our young adults. We need to reprioritize wisdom over information. How much information is at the click of a finger right here? How much wisdom is there? How are we helping young adults discern the difference? See, our society is submerged. We value fairness over justice, consuming over creating, fame over accomplishment, glamour over character, image over holiness, entertainment over discernment. We have to have a blueprint to help them navigate this. Why does anybody care what the Kardashians are doing? Why don't we care what Christ is doing in the lives of our church members and share that? One church in Vancouver, British Columbia made a commitment that they're going to do the following. And the young adults are engaged in this church. It's the Oak Ridge Church in Vancouver, BC. A recent article in Ministry Magazine had a story about them, because relationships. They know every young adult by name. Acceptance. You walk the door, we embrace you. We're going to reach our communities in ways and needs that are relevant, which resonates with young adults. Let's meet the needs right here. And they're doing it, and young adults are coming. They have debates and discussions about theology that are relevant, and young adults are interested in that. The spiritual disciplines, I know it's a word we don't want to use, but it's a reality. Help them learn how to deepen and grow in faith. And there's significant mentoring and lay leadership. And they talk creatively about their faith as it intersects with other faiths. It's not impossible. It's just not easy. It means we're going to care about their world more than mine. Because once we care more about their world than mine, then we're demonstrating we care more about them than my opinions or my traditions. Which do you value more? Your children or your traditions? Here's how you can value your children. And it will resonate with them. Any questions? I have 5 minutes.